We all know that not only Germans fought in the Waffen-SS, it had many Dutch, Danish, Norwegian, Flemish and later French and Walloon volunteers. But did you know that also Russians fought in the ranks of the Waffen-SS? I've talked about Russian collaboration in World War II. Now it's time to study a specific unit, the infamous SS RONA, also known as the Kaminski Brigade. They were so brutal that even the SS distanced itself from it. Keep watching. Good to have you back on the channel. If you're new to this channel, my name is Stefan. I'm a Dutch history teacher and this is History Hustle. I make history videos for you, and if you find it interesting, well, what are you waiting for? Please consider subscribing. Also hit the notification bell to join the hustle. Let's start. On the 22nd of June 1941, 2.6 million German and Axis soldiers invaded the USSR. Despite severe losses against fierce Soviet resistance, the Germans managed to capture much ground and also millions of Soviet POWs. No preparations were made to accommodate that much prisoners of war. They were simply left to starve behind barbed wire. Tragic was the fate of the overwhelming majority of Russians who were willing to fight on the side of the Germans. They were by far the greatest potential resource that Hitler, under other circumstances, could have mobilized in his war against Stalinism. Instead, until 1942, they were classified as subhumans, the last vestiges of discrimination not being lifted until the spring of 1945, with the Red Army already outside Berlin. Hitler forbade the use of Soviet labor and assistance in conquering the East. Nevertheless, soon first auxiliary volunteers were mobilized. This happened in secret though, since Hitler was firmly against it. The decision to recruit Soviet volunteers to serve for the German came forth of discussion between Nazi ideologists and Nazi pragmatists. The Slavs, and especially the Russians, were seen as inferior. However, the Germans captured large grounds, and these had to be pacified. These had to be brought under control and also cleared of resistance activities, as the war in the East demanded more and more manpower. The first recruits were drawn mostly from non-Russian nationalities, mostly those of the Caucasus and Turkestan. Later, Ukrainians and Cossacks were also recruited, and eventually also Russians were able to join. According to historian Richard Overy, around 1 million Soviet people joined the ranks of the Germans. Hundreds and thousands of these were Russians, perhaps even 500,000. So that makes it a larger number of Russian collaborators than there were Ukrainian collaborators. The first Russian volunteers were called Hiwis, which stands for Hilfswillige, auxiliary volunteers. These were recruited out of military and logistical necessity. Russian POWs could serve as interpreter, wagon and lorry drivers, cooks, medical orderlies, messengers, and ammunition carriers. From August 1941, the Germans also established the so-called security units, Sicherungsverbände. Apart from Russians, some Ukrainians and Belarusians also served in these formations. Their job was to patrol the rear area and clear these areas from partisan activities. In the meanwhile, the SS also raised local militia to do this job, and one of the volunteers was Bronislav Kaminsky. He would later make a career in the branch of Russian collaborators. Late 1941, the 2nd Panzer Army conducted an experiment on its own initiative in the Bryansk region. During the autumn of 1941, in a village named Lokot in the Ural province, anti-Soviet militias began to be formed spontaneously. as Soviet authority had vanished from the area. Early October, the first German reconnaissance troops arrived in the region, and there, technical school teacher Konstantin Voskoboynik, who was considered by his students as a gifted orator, welcomed them. He delivered a speech in a local hospital where he declared, "For 24 years we have not had the right to speak the truth, and it is only now, after we have cast off the unendurable fetters of slavery and lies, that we can deliver a curse on the scoundrel Stalin, who has drowned Russia in blood." A local administration was founded. Konstantin Voskoboynik became the mayor, and his deputy was Bronislav Kaminsky. Their armed squad was named the People's Militia. They made use of Soviet weaponry. By the end of the year, self-defense groups were set up to guard villages. Voskoboynik was determined to fight the partisans mercilessly. They also made use of a local print shop to facilitate propaganda. A 12-point program was issued. Half of the points were devoted to land ownership. Rank-and-file Communist Party members were allowed to go free as long as they had not committed crimes against the local population. And the leaders of the Lokot Autonomous Region, they viewed their ideology as a variant of Russian National Socialism. Voskoboynik was able to expand his rule. Now, the Germans weren't too keen on his political influences and setting up a political party, but hey, they were happy that Voskoboynik was willing to fight against the partisans. Several coordinated attacks by the partisans were carried out against the leaders of the Lokot Autonomy. January 1942, Voskoboynik was killed in battle, and he was succeeded by his deputy, Bronislav Kaminsky. He was half Polish, half German, and he from now on ran the Lokot. I read different accounts on how he ran things. Here is what Richard Overy wrote. Backed by 10,000 men and thousands of camp followers, Kaminsky was left to pacify the region as he saw fit. His forces became part of the pretentiously titled Russian National Army of Liberation, though they liberated little, save other people's possessions. Now, another historian wrote the following. Schools and cultural facilities flourished, and a cleverly contrived tax system rewarded anti-communist activities. Kaminsky gained particular popularity by abolishing the hated kolkhoz system. He doled out land to merited anti-partisans who then farmed these lands as soldier peasants, Wehrbauer, so to speak, generating surpluses, in stark contrast to German economic and occupation policy in the rest of occupied Russia. So perhaps we can argue that the living conditions in the Lokot were better than elsewhere in German-occupied Russia, but that doesn't say much since life in German-occupied USSR was already terrible enough. If you have more information on how things were run in the Lokot region, do let us know in the comments below. So Kaminsky's militia was known as the Russian Liberation National Army, in short RONA, which should not be confused with ROA, the Russian Liberation Army by Andrey Vlasov. I covered that in another video, see the link in the top right corner. 1 year later, the RONA from now on, had over 10,000 men, and I read that also Russian Jews served in this unit. Most recruits were either partisan deserters or came from the German POW camps. Their equipment was a hodgepodge of German and Soviet weaponry and uniforms. If you look to this photo, for example, you see that there is no standardization. The situation changed in 1943 when the Germans began to withdraw. In August, 6,000 soldiers of the Kaminsky Brigade and 25,000 civilians were evacuated to Belarusia. They now found themselves as an occupying army in a hostile environment where powerful partisan groups attacked them regularly. One RONA unit defected to the partisans. It was in the summer of 1944 that Himmler converted the demoralized unit into a regular division of the Waffen-SS. Now, the SS RONA was born, also known as the 29th Waffen Grenadier Division of the SS, with Kaminski as SS Brigadeführer. In August 1944, they were directed to Warsaw to suppress the Polish uprising against the Germans. Now, here they build up a fierce reputation. Their behavior was appalling. They marauded their way through the city, slaughtering thousands of Poles, which even left ordinary SS men bewildered. Their cruelty can be matched with the notorious Lokot Brigade. Because of their reckless behavior as well as the lack of military result, Kaminsky was shot on German orders. In the eyes of the Nazis, he was a low-grade Slav who had overstayed his welcome in the ranks of his German masters. The decision to dispose of him was taken at the end of August. He was out of Warsaw on leave. A fake car accident was staged near Łódź, either to kill him or to cover the traces of his earlier execution. The remnants of the Kaminski Brigade would serve under General Vlasov in the 600th Infantry Division, the 1st Division of the KONR, as Vlasov's army was now called. Early 1945, Vlasov's formation became nominally an ally of the Third Reich. The reality, however, was more sober, as this example shows. At Nuremberg Central Station, a Russian captain from Vlasov's bodyguard was shot on the spot by a sergeant from the station patrol during an altercation with German Luftwaffe officers who refused to give him a proper seat. The perpetrator went unpunished. As the war came to an end, they moved west and surrendered themselves to the Western Allies. However, shortly after, most of these men were repatriated. Many of them were executed, and others served years in the Gulag prison system. I read that a female executioner who worked for the Lokot Autonomy named Antonina Makarova escaped justice but was arrested, put on trial and executed in the late 1970s. Shout out to my patrons, special thanks to Thomas Zabiega, Liam Devlin, Damian Wallace, Connor, Philip Jordan, Jakob Musland, Nick Turanova, Haley, Mark Little Hale, Janusz Jojankiewicz, Joanne, Justin Tabell, Tanya Dixie, Henry Clarkson, Rob Park, Andrea Martic, Susanna Di Bella, John Beach, Wayback History, Luis Pichera, Fernando Lopez Ojeda, and Mike West. Russian collaboration during World War II was pretty huge. I covered that on this channel quite a bit. So if you want to learn more about Russian collaboration in World War II, you can click right here. You have an overview video. And if you want to learn about the Russian Liberation Army specifically, well, I have a video for you. It's right here. I want to thank you for watching. And das vidanya.